Dear Mr. Reservoir, you have won a boat. Dear Mr. Reservoir, you have won the lottery. Dear Mr. Reservoir, your son misses you dearly and we ask that you get in contact with us. Why don't they just send it to my spam folder via email like a normal person? Wait, what's this?
Dear Sweepstakes winner, congratulations! You are the grand prize winner in ITNL's Vacation Sweepstakes. You have just been selected for an all expenses paid 4-day vacation in the fabulous Valley of the Sparrows. Visit the greatest archaeological discovery of our time, the newly discovered caverns that prove the existence of the great underground empire of Zork, all at no cost to you.
Well, I suppose why not? It's been a year in lockdown, I guess I could go somewhere.
The sweepstakes winner. I've been looking forward to... No! No!
I'm going to talk about Return to Zork for the next
18
minutes.
If you're a fan of adventure games, then at some point in time you've likely encountered the Zork franchise. One of the earliest in the genre, Zork found its footing in the early 80s with its first game in the series with the same name, Zork, a text-adventure game. Released in 1980, the game saw great success and later inspired further games in the Zork universe. Direct sequels followed, with Zork 2, The Wizard of Roboz being released in 1981, and Zork 3, The Dungeon Master being released in 1982. However, other games also took place within the Zork universe, with 1983's Enchanter, 1984's Sorcerer, 1985's Spellbreaker and Wishbringer, and then 1987's Beyond Zork, and then 1988's Zork Zero. Each of these games were released by Infocom, although it wasn't until 1993 that the series began to add detailed graphics and a point-and-click interface with their game, Return to Zork. Return to Zork opens with the player at the famous White House scene in the original Zork, where they open a letter sent by E. Rufus Rupert, advising the player that they have won a sweepstake contest in whatever this introduction is. The game then shows us panning towards the Valley of Sparrows, accompanied to some backing music from the Phantom of the Opera, where the game begins. Return to Zork begins in the now referred to Valley of the Vultures, armed with several items to begin the game. A map, knife, and matches act as our typical adventurer gear, although the game also provides several other items. A camera and a photo album, a tape recorder, and an orb, of which the wizard Tremble contacts the player, acting as a sort of sidekick for the player. However, while this would normally be where the player would receive some vital clues and hints, it instead seems more like you're caught on the bus sitting next to a weird old guy who doesn't understand personal space.
I was telling you about? Now we let that spy think we were going to hide the magic behind a wall of illusion. But we didn't. We just blew it up. We made a decoy wall of illusion. During the explosion, the wall went too.
What?
Tremble often shows up at different times to comment on some of the settings. Often, most of the time, these are just awkward ramblings, which is something a lot of the NPCs of Return to Zork share.
What's that? Who's there? Who are you? What's the password? I can't let you in without the password. And don't try swordfish, I know it's not that. I tried it myself, I couldn't get in. So I know it's not that. Well, we haven't had any visitors here since, I don't know how long. You must be another one of Rupert's sweepstakes winners, huh? Okay, what's the password? Did you say the password? I can't remember. I can't let you in without the password, so you must have already said it, huh?
What?
Communication with characters in Zork are done through a strange system that instead allows you to change the flow of conversation with prompts. For example, you can choose to be more threatening in conversation, fascinated by what the character is saying, but also be more dismissive and bored. Often these can be methods in which the player can extract more information from an NPC, but it also can spell disaster for the player if they choose to antagonise the wrong person.
Oh, hello. The potion's not ready yet, but you could have a cup of tea. Frogs have to boil down just a bit. I use too much water. Some guest!
Player can also use different items and characters to view their responses. Oftentimes, the character won't have anything to share, but with a little luck, sometimes they might provide different responses and hints on how to avoid danger. And you better believe there is a lot of danger in the lands of Zork. In many of the locations in the game, the player faces danger even if it's not immediately evident. For example, when approaching the road to the south of the lighthouse, the player will be prompted with a game over, with no real indicator of what it was that killed you. As a result, it's important to save the game frequently, as you can easily slip up and kill yourself. Happen to pick up some mice? Well, now you're dead. Go to bed in a dark room? That's what the Gru is like. You're dead. Do you give a really bad stand-up comedy routine?
Game's over for you.
Then you better believe you're dead. There are many different ways to slip up and die in this game, but two of the most prominent ones, for me, are two anti-piracy methods that the game incorporates. Often games incorporate a form of copy protection methods to prevent illegal copies of the game being distributed. For Return to Zork, the game incorporates this twice in the game. The first is when you meet with the teacher, Miss Peepers, who teaches in West Shanbar. When she meets with the player, she gives the player a pop quiz, where they're asked to name a day of the week, which is usually a question that should be so simple enough, but because this is a copyright protection question, it's not. If the player puts in the day of the week incorrectly 3 times, Peepers clearly has enough and straight up murders the player. Any normal player might attempt to input the correct date, but that will only result in death. Instead, the universe of Zork features its own calendar and thus has different names for days and months. In order to get this correct, the player needs to refer to their manual bundled with the game, which shows the correct names. For example, Sunday is instead Sanday, Monday is Mud Day, Tuesday is Bruise Day, and such. Answering this correctly lets the player talk to Miss Peepers without threat of their impending doom. Unfortunately, my copy of Return to Zork was through Good Old Games, which provides a copy of the manual to refer to. Later, another form of copy protection appears as the player sneaks into the home of Rebecca Snoot, only to be caught by her and knocked out cold and to wake up with her standing over you with a gun. As you can imagine, she has some questions for you, and you need to be ready to ask whatever hard-pressing questions she has to, and she's just asking the day of the week again. So since we know the days of the week, she immediately trusts us.
Okay. You're alright. So next time try to use the door, and you don't need to steal anything. I know you're on our side, so I'll let you take whatever you need.
What?
Welcome to the bizarre and outright confusing logic of Return to Zork. Throughout this game are moments where the logic can be confusing, and I will admit I had to resort to using a guide. And even with the guide, some of the logic was still lost to me. One that springs to mind is when journeying to the witch's home in the bog. In order to be permitted to take some bats from the witch, the player needs to show her a thermos of milk. The player doesn't give her the milk as an ingredient, but instead she just says, "Oh, take them." A baffling form of logic that I would absolutely not be able to find without a guide. The Zork's puzzles can often find odd logic to complete. One example is the troll caverns that are filled with glam rockers. The player needs to fight their way through trolls, but in order to do so, they need to attack in a certain order. The order is left, up, and down, which allows the player to vanquish the trolls. But however would the player know this? Why, through the directions left by a skeleton outside who wrote L-U-D. Now, I don't know about you guys, I feel following the instructions of a guy who died is probably not the best idea. The player also finds himself playing against Mudok, who challenges him to a game of Survivor, a board game where you play as Canuck and need to block the wizard. I still don't understand the premise of the game, but I found it impossible to lose the game as it seems the Canuck player has a big advantage over the wizard player. I wound up winning this several times without really trying.
Nobody really takes the time to learn this game.
Gee Mudok, is that maybe because the game sucks? The game also features areas where the player explores mazes. At first I thought this might be an easy endeavour and took to mapping the area as I journeyed. Now this is what the map started off like, but then I realised the grand scope of the map was a lot bigger than anticipated. As a result, it's a small wonder that I needed a guide to even think about making my way through this game. But what really required the guide in the first place is because the game drops one of the most frustrating obstacles in video gaming. Pitfalls that result in being impossible to complete the game. Many video game franchises from this era included pitfalls that would result in the player being brought to a stalemate, such as Sierra's King's Quest franchise. While the practice became a little less frequent in modern times, the concept was all too familiar for players in the 90s. Return to Zork being no exception. Return to Zork allows the player a lot of freedom of what they can do, but often it comes at a cost if the action is deemed illegal. If the player wants to steal something, they can certainly try, and pretty much every character in the game can be slain. However, even if they're not important characters that serve no further purpose, this will ultimately ruin your chances of completing the game, as this draws the attention of the Guardian.
Stop right there, criminal scum!
The Guardian tends to show up whenever a criminal activity is done, even without any witnesses around. If the player kills a person and leaves, they will find the screen fades to black and lets them know that victory has been blocked. That's when the Guardian shows up and takes all your items as punishment before popping you back into the world. This applies to many different things outside of murder. For example, if you break into Rebecca Snoot's house and take her stuff without talking to her, then this will attract the attention of the Guardian. Another is by opening and reading Ben's letter to the witch, which also counts as against the law and results in punishment from the Guardian. At this point, there is no reason to keep playing because you're absolutely goosed and will probably just need to reload the game. You might think the game is at least nice enough to tell you that the game is unwinnable, but this only happens when the Guardian shows. There are still times when the game can present itself as unwinnable, and the player won't even know. For example, I opened the letter and must have saved at some point where I didn't actually read the letter, which resulted in the Guardian showing up. However, I did deliver the letter open to the witch, which resulted in her killing me. And as far as I can tell, this just meant the game was unwinnable at this point, and I opted to start again from the beginning with a guide. Eventually, after a lot of trial and error, the player reaches the endgame, the Citadel of Zork. where the evil Morpheus resides. However, before the player can reach the villain, they need to cross the bridge. Any attempt to cross over it will result in their demise. So how do you safely cross? I'll let you have a wee moment to think about that. The answer? By throwing all of your items at the bridge.
What?
Why? Who knows? After throwing away every single item you've amassed during your journey, you find yourself up against Morpheus in an epic game of Survivor. Again. Seriously? After besting Morpheus in a game of Survivor which felt pretty weighed against the player, but with my strategic mind was no problem, the game ends with everyone free and results in Morpheus's evil magic being sealed away. The game ends with the player finally meeting with Rupert, and they are graded on their performance through the points they've amassed. And that was Return to Zork. A beloved series to be sure, and it certainly has its charm, although the game's age and dated mechanics certainly show, especially when we compare it to others in the genre such as Secret at Monkey Island, which released 3 years prior. Unfortunately, I feel the game isn't particularly enjoyable as others in the series, such as my OG, Grand Inquisitor. The peculiar setting, characters and logic are something I feel fell short for me, revisiting the game nearly 30 years later on, but at the end, the game definitely shows the building blocks of a genre I have come to love. Want to make sure you don't miss out on the next video when it's released? Then make sure you don't forget to subscribe to Noir Reservoir and click that little bell down there to be kept up to date on all future videos. Content is typically released as frequently as possible, but I always appreciate likes and comments, and if you can also share the video, I'll absolutely love you 5-ever. So until next time my friends, I will catch you later. Bye bye.